Hello and welcome to Just a Tiny Amount, your channel for all things stop motion. I'm Gordon Craig and today we will be continuing to make a twisted wire armature. If you don't know what I'm talking about, I suggest you watch this video. Once you've done that, to follow along with the second part, other than the unfinished armature, you will need some K&S tubing, which you can get from your local model store or the internet if you don't have one. Some 2-part epoxy, which you can get from the same place as the tubing, some foam, some masking tape, a ruler, and a hacksaw, and anything else I can remember once I've turned this camera off. Today we're going to be in the workshop, which is a bit small, so get cozy. In this tutorial Tuesday, we're going to be taking our armature that we made last week and making it look a bit more like a puppet. Our armature is the right shape, but currently the wire will bend wherever we attempt to. I want to restrict this movement to just the joints. In order to achieve that, I'm going to wrap the bits that I don't want to move in masking tape, but before we do that, let's give it some hands and feet. I've done a profile sketch of our gorilla at the same scale as the original one. This shows the shape of the arm and the size of the hand that I want to make. So in the same way that we made the foot last time, I'm going to make an armature for the hand. Now I'm going to start by running wire around the fingers. You lose a lot of length when you twist it, so go big. And then for the thumb, we'll have a bit of wire that starts in the wrist and comes into the hand because the K&S tube won't fit 4 pieces. So before we start twisting, our wire armature looks a little bit like that. If you are going to use pliers, remember to choose ones with smooth insides. You don't want to damage the wire. Next we're going to twist the wrist together so we can see where the thumb starts. The loose end can get wrapped around the rest of the hand. And our hand now looks a little bit like that. Now to make another one and a couple of feet. Okay, so I've now made a second hand and a pair of feet. I prefer these feet to the one that we have on the armature, so I'm afraid the one we've got is going to be cut off and we'll put one of these on instead. So now that we've got this, we need to work out how much K&S tube we need. So this is the K&S tube that I'm going to use. When you look around, you'll probably find them measured in some obscene fraction of an inch, but this is a 3mm tube and a 4mm tube, and the 3mm tube fits nicely within the 4mm tube. So now what we need to do is work out how long each tube needs to be. So the armatures for our hands come up to about there. We need to leave a short space to allow the wrists to bend. About 5mm is probably enough. Then we'll go into the K&S tube. So the way that will look is we'll have 15mm of tube attached to the wrist, we'll have 5mm of tube attached to the arm, and then we'll have 20mm of tube as the outer sheath. We need this bit here to attach the arm to the outer sheath because the outer sheath is going to be a lot wider than the wire, so this bridges the gap. So if we measure this properly, 20mm is there, which means that we have about 36mm from the shoulder to where the elbow has to finish. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to cut these 3 pieces of tubing. The 5mm, the 15mm length, and the 20mm length of the larger tube. Now for cutting KNS tube, I would normally use a Dremel with a cutting disc attached. If you do this, be sure to use proper eye protection, and remember that the tube will get very hot. Do not touch it straight after cutting it, and do not let it fall into your lap. It is not pleasant. For this video, however, I'm going to be using a hacksaw. And now I remember why I use a Dremel. The tubing that you've just cut will be very rough around the edges. You need to file them down to make them as smooth as possible. So once your shoulders are recovered, get the file out and get smoothing. So once you've finished cleaning that up, you should have 4 sets of KNS tube. If like mine your puppet has short legs, you might have to cut shorter sections of tubing. In this case, I've still got 5mm for the bottom of the leg, but then I've only got 10mm for the end of the foot. 15mm for the whole thing should be plenty. So onto the operating table comes our armature. We're going to replace the end of the arms and legs with this new KNS tube, and we need to work out where we need to put the cuts. Don't worry, you won't feel a thing. Goodbye foot. So that's him ready to receive his new bionic limbs. Now that we've got everything prepared, it's time to mix up some epoxy. Normally I would let that dry before putting the next bit on, but live dangerously once in a while. And we now have all the pieces drying, so I'm going to go and try and wash this stuff off my hands, and we'll come back to this in a few hours. When everything's dry, you should hopefully find that everything still fits nicely together. You may find that excess epoxy on the tubes is stopping them from marrying up nicely. If this is the case, just sand down the outside of the smaller tubes and the inside of the larger tubes, and then everything should fit nicely together once they're cleaned up. Hopefully you're not making a video like I am, so you can put more care into the process. You really should take the time to do things like letting the epoxy on the inserts dry before putting the sheaths on. It's little things like this that makes life a lot easier. You may find that the connectors are quite loose when you're finished, which is not something you want in a puppet. There are various ways of holding it in place. For a long-term reliable solution, what you can do is take a very small drill bit and put a hole through all of the tubing. You can then hold everything in place using a nut and bolt. There are simpler solutions though. Because the fit between the two tubes is so tight, any small dent will cause it to stick. What we need to do is make sure that that dent is in the right place at the right time. To do this, what we need to do is identify a point on the sheath where the two overlap. When you put them back together, make sure you have the right hand on the right arm, or left arm in this case. Then take a Phillips screwdriver with a fairly sharp point and place that where you want the dent to be. Then with a hammer, make one gentle tap on the top of the screwdriver. That really is all you need. Don't go crazy with the hammering, otherwise you'll never get the two sides apart. Even with that tiny dent, these two are now held fast, and you do need to pull quite hard for them to come apart. This is what you're looking for. When you've done that, all of the extremities should stay in place. Next, we want to wrap the bones in masking tape to stop them from bending. We're going to take lengths of tape and just wrap them around until we've got a fairly thick layer. If the masking tape is too wide, then just cut it to the right width. Try not to handle the sticky side too much, because this will make it lose its stick. Before we go on, there are a few questions you need to ask yourself about your puppet. Firstly, do you want your puppet to be able to shrug? Raising and lowering its shoulders is a good way to add personality to a character, but it does allow the shoulders to drift. As you move the arms, the shoulders can move as well. You may find at the end of the scene that you've done the entire thing squint. To prevent this, what you can do is to bind all of the shoulders together. If you want to allow it to shrug, you bind each shoulder individually. I think my gorilla is the type of person who shrugs. Secondly, how flexible are they around the body? Are they the type of character that can bend over and touch their toes? My gorilla is going to have a large belly, so I think any bending that's going to happen is going to happen between his chest and his belly, so everything else is going to be bound up. Lastly, how are you going to secure your puppet in place? Many people put small nuts into the feet, which allows you to screw into them and hold them in place. I'm going to put a nut in the back of my puppet, because I've got a feeling this is a gorilla that does a lot of sitting down. So with these three things in mind, I'm going to be binding the belly section separate to the chest section. I'm going to be doing each shoulder individually, and I'm going to be using something different to bind the pelvis. Let me introduce you to Milliput. It is a two-part putty that is incredibly easy to sculpt when you first mix it together, but it then dries rock hard. You can saw it, sand it, drill it. It's really very versatile. In the past, I've made a whole sculpture out of it. We're going to be using it for our puppet's pelvis, both to hold it in place and also to secure the nut. The first thing we're going to do is mix it together. When working with Milliput, always wear gloves because it is slightly toxic. Now that it is mixed together, we've got about 30 minutes before it goes hard. Now that that's done, we need to choose where we're going to put our nut. As this guy is always going to be sat down, I think there's a fairly obvious contender. Before I do this, I'm going to put a rod into the nut to stop it getting filled up with Milliput. The rod is covered in Vaseline, so hopefully the Milliput won't stick to it. Now while we're waiting for the butt nut to cure, let's have a look at how we're going to flesh out the body of the puppet. If we refer back to the sketches, we can get some idea about the shape of the character. The size of the back compared to the size of the front, the shape of the limbs, that sort of thing. While we could sculpt the body, take a mould of it and then cast it in silicone or expanding foam rubber, I'm going to keep things simple and just use foam. A nice man at our local foam shop sold me this offcut for a few pounds. If you don't have a foam shop, try and find somewhere that repairs furniture. If you don't have one of them, then you can just buy it online. You can cut the foam with a sharp knife or scissors. You're just aiming for a rough shape now. We'll be refining it later. When you've got these pieces cut out, place the armature on top of them. Not only will this make sure that everything fits, it'll also give you an idea of where you need to make space for the armature to go. You want to make small channels for the wire to fit in so you can maximise contact between the two sides of the foam. When everything's ready, we're going to glue the two sides together. You can use something like Copydex for this. I'm going to use contact adhesive. Smear this evenly on both sides, let it dry, and then push both sides together. And now do the same for the arms and legs. Now that you've got the basic shapes in place, you just need to refine them. Anyway, you get the idea. In future videos we'll be looking at how to finish off the hands and feet, as well as how to cover the whole thing in this nice fur. Don't get me started on the head, there's at least a couple of videos in that. That was Tutorial Tuesday. This is just a tiny amount. I'm Gordon Craig, and I will see you in the next video.